Earlier this week, Attorney General Merrick Garland filed a federal brief effectively shielding Donald Trump in a defamation lawsuit over allegations of rape.
Meanwhile, the White House has tapped lawyer Neil MacBride as general counsel to the Treasury Department. But it just so happens he previously sued the department on behalf of ExxonMobil. Joining us now to discuss the Biden administration's nominees is Executive Director of the Revolving Door Project at the Center for Economic Policy and Research, Jeff Hauser. Welcome, Jeff.
Great to be here.
Now, speaking of the revolving door, tell us what on earth is going on right here.
I think that on the legal side of the Biden administration, it's the same old, same old. We're seeing a return to the types of appointees that have characterized previous Democratic administrations that brought you the end of the rule of law and the end of white-collar criminal rich person accountability. So Merrick Garland is, as Attorney General, what I like to call an unfrozen caveman Clintonite. He went into the judiciary during Bill Clinton's presidency, and he is bringing back that 1990s Justice Department energy to the Biden administration. And while I think Reagan and George H.W. Bush were terrible presidents, they weren't quite Trump, and we really do not need that kind of 1990s energy at DOJ. And Neil MacBride, who has now been queued up to be the general counsel at Treasury, he is a former U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, where he went after Ed Snowden and Chelsea Manning and defended military when accused of facilitating rape. And he then went into private practice where he represented Exxon and Morgan Stanley and all of the worst possible clients. And yeah, we're not happy.
Remember when the Exxon CEO was our Secretary of State?
I do remember that.
Those were the good old days.
So, Jeff, back in December, if you remember, Biden held a private meeting with civil rights attorneys. That was that audio of which was leaked to me. And in that meeting, he promised those civil rights leaders that there would be an attorney general who had extensive experience in civil rights law. People read into that he was talking about Doug Jones because he was being pressed to name an African-American attorney general in that meeting. And he was basically saying, well, I'm not going to do that, but I promise you that it will be somebody who has extensive civil rights experience. And Doug Jones very much fits that, having prosecuted the Klan and some other work that he has done. Do you know what happened between that moment and Merrick Garland getting the nomination? Because clearly Doug Jones faded, and they went with Garland, I think, as a way to kind of own the conservatives. Mm-hmm. Like let's get this meme guy as the attorney general, without realizing, and quite satisfactory to a lot of people in the administration, that they were getting a 90s era corporate Democrat. How did it go from Jones to Garland?
I'm not totally sure. I do think that the Biden administration was taken aback by the positive news out of the Georgia runoff elections. Mm-hmm. I have very good reason to believe they did not expect that Democrats would take both of those seats in Georgia. And that good news gave them a little bit more freedom because Merrick Garland was an active member of the D.C. circuit. And Mitch McConnell would never have confirmed any Democrat to replace Merrick Garland were he to be attorney general. And so I don't even think Merrick Garland was a plausible candidate in December if you assume Democrats were not going to win the Georgia runoff. So they fortuitously won the Georgia runoffs, but then Garland became a more live option. And I think they thought they could deal with the civil rights community's concerns by announcing what was pretty unprecedented. They went 1, 2, 3, 4 in naming DOJ people. So Garland was appointed along with Vanita Gupta, the former acting head of DOJ civil rights under Obama, a widely respected figure active in the public interest legal community, as well as Kristen Clark to run DOJ civil rights. And so I think they thought those appointments of two very well-respected people sort of satisfied the concern. From my vantage point, that's wrong. DOJ civil rights is very important. The Associate Attorney General position for which Vanita Gupta has now been put in place is very important, but they're not the same thing as being Attorney General. They're not the same thing even as being Deputy Attorney General. The Justice Department has enormously wide powers that reach both across the country via U.S. attorneys' offices and into basically every issue area. And much of that government should be infused by a civil rights point of view, and it's not under Merrick Garland.
And so we went from hope and change to drain the swamp to build back better. And we are now, administration after administration, as is the cycle of history naturally in this country, to have politicians speaking almost with populist rhetoric about the swamp and the system of special interests here in Washington, D.C. And nothing really changes at the end of the day in the context of this conversation about Biden and Neil MacBride. I think that's glaringly clear. But do you think it's changing at all? Has there been any decrease if we track the trajectory of the swamp and of special interests? Do you think that from Trump to Biden, let's just confine it to that transition, do you think there's been a difference? Do you see that the revolving door is swinging more wildly during the Biden administration compared to the Trump administration? In these early months of the Biden administration, who's been worse so far, Trump or Biden?
I think Trump was worse. I mean, you have people like Rex Tillerson, who you referenced, who became Secretary of State in order to reduce his tax bill in a very complicated way, among other
Respect the hustle.
Yeah, and you have people like Stephen Mnuchin, who I think remain perpetually under the radar as Secretary of Treasury, Wilbur Ross at Commerce. Mm-hmm. You had like straight out of Wall Street, not just like the people who are the peons hired to represent Wall Street in court. You had the actual Wall Street titans running large swaths of the government. You also had institutions like the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs within the Office of Management and Budget, which, man, I know it sounds boring and wonky, but is super influential. Those institutions were much worse under Trump and Obama than they are under Biden. So there's definitely Biden has still managed to outperform Obama on appointments. But that mostly speaks to the fact that in 2009, Obama's appointments were enormously disappointing. Biden's appointments are definitely a mixed bag, and I'm not necessarily that encouraged by the most recent news, including the Neil MacBride. But I do think we have to remember how bad the 2009-2010 appointments were to contextualize where we are within the Democratic Party. And Trump was just bad. Right.
And Obama's were bad too. You're right. Last question, and then we got to run. What's your latest read on the fight over Assistant Attorney General for antitrust?
I am mildly encouraged. What I'm seeing is that the more consistent engagement is from progressives or populists of all sorts, the better. I think the fact that Lena Khan had such a strong vote in committee sends a very strong message that a figure like Jonathan Cantor for Assistant Attorney General not only can get to 50 votes plus Kamala Harris, but can leap way beyond that. And I think the Biden administration is dealing with a lot on its plate, and they like to avoid headaches. So I'm encouraged that they will go the right way on Assistant Attorney General for antitrust, because that would minimize the number of headaches they face.
It's quite remarkable, but the more populist candidate at this moment on antitrust might actually have an easier time getting through the United States Senate than the establishment corporate pick, who's also in line. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
More Rising for you coming up. Stick with us.